Alexander Hartwell adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the third time, staring at his reflection in the penthouse mirror. In 2 hours, he would marry Victoria Sterling, the society princess his board had practically hand-picked for him. Everything was perfect. The $5 million venue, the designer flowers, the guest list that read like a who's who of corporate America. But as he reached for the wedding invitation list one final time, his eyes stopped on a name he'd added in a moment of weakness. Emma Rodriguez, his college sweetheart. The woman he'd loved and lost 5 years ago. What he didn't know was that Emma would arrive with a 4-year-old girl whose piercing blue eyes and stubborn chin were unmistakably his own. Welcome to Stories Worth Telling. Before we begin this powerful story of sacrifice, hope, and unexpected miracles, please let us know in the comments which city you're watching us from today, and if you believe stories like these deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us ensure they're never forgotten. The Hartwell estate sprawled across 50 acres of manicured perfection in the Hamptons, its Georgian architecture standing like a monument to old money and older expectations. Alexander stood at the altar in the estate's rose garden, watching 300 of the most powerful people in America take their seats on white silk chairs. The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon with mathematical precision, and everything sparkled under the late afternoon sun. Victoria Sterling walked down the aisle like she owned it, which, given her family's net worth, she practically did. She was stunning in the way that money could make a person stunning. Every feature perfectly proportioned, every detail curated by the best stylists money could buy. Alexander smiled as she approached, playing his part in what felt more like a merger than a marriage. He had loved once, deeply and recklessly, but that was before he understood the weight of family legacy, before his father's death had thrust him into the CEO role at Hartwell Industries at the impossibly young age of 28. Love, he had learned, was a luxury that men in his position couldn't afford. The ceremony proceeded without incident until the minister reached the traditional question, "If anyone objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." It was supposed to be rhetorical. It always was at weddings like this. But from the back of the gathering, a voice called out, clear and unmistakable, "I object." 300 heads turned in unison. Alexander's blood turned to ice water in his veins. Emma Rodriguez stood at the edge of the garden, wearing a simple blue dress that cost less than Victoria's shoes, but somehow made her more beautiful than anyone else there. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face free of the layers of makeup that adorned every other woman present. She looked exactly as Alexander remembered her, stunning in her authenticity, radiant in her refusal to apologize for who she was. But beside her stood a little girl who made Alexander's world tilt on its axis. The child was perhaps 4 years old, with Alexander's distinctive blue eyes, his stubborn chin, and the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. She wore a yellow sundress and clutched a small teddy bear, looking around at the opulent gathering with curiosity rather than intimidation. "Emma?" Alexander's voice cracked like a teenager's. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand tightened on her bouquet. "Alexander, who is this woman?" Emma walked forward slowly, her daughter's hand in hers, until she stood just at the edge of the white silk runner that divided the guests. "Hello, Alex," she said quietly. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I know I should have called, but I tried your office, and they said you were unreachable today." "This is my wedding," Alexander said, still reeling from the shock of seeing her. What could possibly be so important? His words died in his throat as he really looked at the little girl. The resemblance wasn't just strong, it was undeniable. She had his eyes, his nose, even the way he had stood as a child, one foot slightly ahead of the other, ready to run at a moment's notice. "Alexander," Victoria hissed through her perfect smile, "what is happening?" Emma knelt down beside her daughter and whispered something in her ear. The little girl nodded solemnly, then looked up at Alexander, with an expression of pure innocence. "Are you my daddy?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence of the garden. If a pin had dropped at that moment, it would have sounded like thunder. Alexander stared at the child, his mind racing through dates and possibilities, and the night 5 years ago when Emma had walked out of his life after he'd chosen family duty over their love. The night he'd been too proud to follow her, too convinced that she would come back when she realized what she was giving up. "Emma," he said, his voice barely audible. "Is she?" "Her name is Sophie," Emma said, standing up and placing a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Sophie Maria Rodriguez. She's 4 years old." Alexander did the math in his head, and the numbers lined up with devastating precision. 5 years ago, minus 9 months. Victoria's bouquet hit the ground with a soft thud. "This is impossible. Alexander, tell me this is some kind of joke." But Alexander couldn't speak. He was staring at Sophie, seeing himself in every feature, remembering the last night he and Emma had spent together before their world fell apart. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding," Emma said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "I came because Sophie has been asking about her father, and I couldn't lie to her anymore. She deserves to know who you are, even if you don't want to know her." The guests were murmuring now, a low rumble of shock and speculation. Alexander could see his future dissolving in real time. The merger with Victoria's family, the political connections, the carefully constructed life he'd built around duty and expectation. Alexander, Victoria's mother, stood up from the front row, her voice sharp with authority. "I demand to know what this circus is about." But Alexander wasn't listening to Victoria, or her mother, or the mounting chaos around him. He was watching Sophie, who had let go of her mother's hand and taken a tentative step forward. "You have pretty eyes," she said to him solemnly, "just like mine." Alexander knelt down without thinking, bringing himself to Sophie's level. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. She had his chin, Emma's nose, and an expression of quiet intelligence that reminded him of photographs of himself at that age. "Hi, Sophie," he said softly. "You're very pretty." "Thank you," she said with the formal politeness of a child who had been taught good manners. "Mommy says you're a very important man." "Not so important," Alexander replied, glancing up at Emma. "What else does Mommy say about me?" "That you have a big house and you help people with their jobs, and that you used to make her laugh." Alexander felt something crack inside his chest. "I did make her laugh, didn't I?" Emma's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Every day." Victoria's voice cut through the moment like ice. "This is absolutely unacceptable. Alexander, we are in the middle of our wedding ceremony. Whatever this woman's delusions are." "They're not delusions," Alexander said, standing up slowly. He looked at Victoria, then at the assembled guests, then back at Emma and Sophie. "She's telling the truth." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this moment. "I beg your pardon?" Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. "Sophie is my daughter," Alexander said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Emma is her mother, and I've been an idiot for 5 years." The explosion of voices that followed was immediate and overwhelming. Victoria's mother was shouting about scandal and lawsuits. The wedding planner was running around in circles trying to figure out what to do with 300 guests and a ceremony that had just imploded. Business associates were already pulling out their phones, probably calling their lawyers or the press. But Alexander heard none of it. He walked down the aisle, past Victoria, past the altar, past the chaos, until he stood directly in front of Emma. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Emma's composure finally cracked. "I tried, Alex. I called you 3 months after I left. Your assistant said you were in meetings. I called again a week later, and she said you'd given instructions not to be disturbed by me. I sent emails, letters, I even came to your office building, but security wouldn't let me up." Alexander closed his eyes, remembering. After Emma had left, he'd been furious, heartbroken, and too proud to admit he'd made a mistake. He'd told his assistant to screen his calls, to keep Emma away if she tried to contact him. He'd convinced himself that if she really loved him, she would have stayed and fought for them. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," Emma replied. "That's why I gave up trying. I figured if you wanted to be part of her life, you would have found a way." "And you've been raising her alone all this time?" Emma nodded. "I'm a teacher now, elementary school. We have a small apartment across town. It's not much, but it's ours." Alexander looked down at Sophie, who was watching the adults with the patient expression of a child who was used to waiting while grown-ups figured things out. "Sophie," he said, kneeling down again. "Would you like to see my house? It has a big garden and a swimming pool." Sophie looked up at her mother for permission. Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Can Mr. Brown come too?" Sophie asked, holding up her teddy bear. "Of course Mr. Brown can come," Alexander said solemnly. "Does he like swimming?" Sophie giggled. "Teddy bears can't swim, silly." "Oh, right, I forgot. It's been a long time since I talked to a teddy bear." Behind them, the chaos continued. Victoria was in heated conversation with her parents, gesturing angrily in Alexander's direction. The guests were beginning to disperse, some looking scandalized, others simply confused. The wedding planner was directing staff to start clearing the ceremony site. "Alexander," Victoria appeared beside them, her voice tight with controlled fury. "We need to talk, now." "Yes, we do," Alexander agreed, standing up. "But first I need to take Emma and Sophie inside. They've had a long day." "Absolutely not. This woman has disrupted our wedding with wild accusations." "They're not accusations, Victoria. They're facts. Sophie is my daughter, and I'm going to get to know her." Victoria's perfect composure finally cracked. "And what about me? What about our marriage? What about everything we've planned?" Alexander looked at her, this woman he'd been about to marry out of duty rather than love, and felt something like relief wash over him. "I'm sorry, Victoria. You deserve better than a husband who's marrying you for the wrong reasons." "The wrong reasons? Alexander, we're perfect for each other. Our families, our businesses, our social circles. But we don't love each other," Alexander said gently. "We both know that. We like each other, we respect each other, but we don't love each other, not the way people should when they get married." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her calculating, weighing her options, considering damage control, thinking about what this meant for her own carefully planned future. "This is about her, isn't it?" she said finally, nodding toward Emma. "You're still in love with the teacher." Alexander glanced at Emma, who was pretending not to listen while helping Sophie fix her teddy bear's bow. "I don't know," he said, honestly. "But I know I want to find out. And I know I want to be Sophie's father, if she'll let me." The next few hours were a blur of difficult conversations and painful decisions. Victoria left with her family, dignified in defeat, but making it clear that the social ramifications of this day would follow Alexander for years. Business associates made polite excuses and departed early, already calculating how this scandal might affect their own relationships with Hartwell Industries. But as the sun set over the estate gardens, Alexander found himself sitting on the terrace with Emma and Sophie, sharing pizza and watching his daughter play with a toy airplane she'd found in the estate's vast toy collection. Toys that had been bought for the children of visiting executives, but had never really been played with. "She's amazing," Alexander said, watching Sophie make airplane noises as she flew the toy around the patio. "She's stubborn and brilliant and completely fearless," Emma said, "just like her father. You've done an incredible job raising her." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I won't lie, Alex. It's been hard. Really hard. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was doing the right thing, keeping her from you. But I thought you'd moved on. I thought you didn't want to be found. I was an idiot, Alexander said simply. I was hurt and proud and too stubborn to admit I'd made a mistake. When you left, I convinced myself that if you really loved me, you would have stayed. And I convinced myself that if you really loved me, you would have chosen me over your family's expectations. They watched Sophie for a while in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts of what might have been. "What happens now?" Emma asked finally. "Now I learn how to be a father," Alexander said. "And maybe, if you'll let me, I learn how to be the man I should have been 5 years ago." Emma turned to look at him. "Alex, I didn't come here to win you back. I came here because Sophie deserves to know her father. But I won't be your consolation prize, and I won't let her be your guilt project." "That's not what this is," Alexander said quickly. "Emma, seeing you today, seeing Sophie, it reminded me of who I used to be, who I wanted to be, before I let duty and expectations turn me into someone I don't even recognize. People don't change overnight, Alex. You're still a billionaire CEO with responsibilities and a lifestyle that doesn't include single teachers and their 4-year-old daughters. Then maybe it's time to change some of those things." Sophie ran over to them, breathless from play. "Daddy." She stopped, looking uncertain. "Can I call you Daddy?" Alexander felt his throat close up. "I would be honored if you called me Daddy." "Daddy, can we swim in your pool tomorrow?" "If it's okay with Mommy, we can swim in the pool right now." Sophie looked at her mother with pleading eyes. Emma smiled and nodded. "But we don't have swimsuits," she pointed out. "I have an indoor pool and a pool house with everything you could need," Alexander said. One of the few advantages of having too much money. An hour later, Alexander found himself in a swimming pool for the first time in years, teaching his daughter how to float while Emma sat on the edge with her feet in the water. Sophie was fearless in the water, just as Emma— "Look, Daddy, I'm a starfish," Sophie announced, spreading her arms and legs wide as Alexander supported her back. "You're the most beautiful starfish I've ever seen," Alexander said, and meant it. As the evening progressed, the three of them fell into an easy rhythm. Sophie chattered constantly, telling Alexander about her school, her friends, her favorite books and movies. Emma added details and context, painting a picture of a life that was simple, but rich with love and laughter. "She reads at a second-grade level already," Emma said proudly as Sophie demonstrated her swimming skills. "And she's teaching herself Spanish from my old textbooks." "Hablas español, Papa?" Sophie asked, paddling over to him. "Un poquito," Alexander replied, surprised by how naturally the word papa had rolled off her tongue. "Mommy says it's important to speak lots of languages because the world is big and full of interesting people. Mommy is very smart." "I know," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "She's the smartest mommy in the whole world." Alexander looked at Emma, who was blushing slightly. "I think Sophie might be right about that." Later, after Sophie had been convinced to get out of the pool and had been wrapped in a fluffy bathrobe that was comically too large for her, the three of them sat in the estate's library while Sophie explored the children's book section. "I have a trust fund," Alexander said suddenly. Emma looked up from the book she'd been browsing. "What?" "A trust fund, for Sophie. I want to set one up so she never has to worry about college or anything else she might need." "Alex! And I want to buy you a house, a real house with a yard where she can play and rooms for all her toys and books." "Alex, stop. And I want to be part of her life, really part of it. I want to take her to school and help with homework and teach her how to drive when she's 16. "Alexander, stop," Emma said more firmly. "You can't just throw money at this situation and expect it to solve everything." "I'm not trying to solve anything with money. I'm trying to take care of my daughter and the woman who raised her." "I don't need you to take care of me. I've been doing fine on my own. I know you have, but you shouldn't have to do it alone anymore." Emma was quiet for a long moment, watching Sophie, who had found a picture book about airplanes and was sitting cross-legged on the library floor, completely absorbed. She asks about you sometimes, Emma said finally. Not often, but sometimes. She wants to know why other kids have daddies and she doesn't. What do you tell her? I tell her that some families are different, and that being different doesn't mean being less. I tell her that she has a mommy who loves her enough for two parents.
That's not fair to either of you.
Life isn't fair, Alex. But we make the best of what we have. Alexander moved closer to her on the couch. What if we could make it better? What are you asking? I'm asking if you think there's still something here between us. I'm asking if you think we could be a family. Emma stared at him for a long moment. Alex, 5 hours ago you were getting married to someone else. 5 hours ago I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Again. And how do I know you won't change your mind tomorrow, or next week, or when the novelty of having a daughter wears off? Because, Alexander said, taking her hand, I never stopped loving you. I convinced myself I had. I told myself it was better this way. But seeing you today reminded me that everything I've built over the past 5 years has been an attempt to fill the hole you left when you walked away. I didn't walk away, Alex. You chose duty over love. You chose your family's expectations over our future. You're right, and I've regretted it every day since. Emma pulled her hand away. This is too much, too fast. Sophie and I have a life. It's small and simple, but it's ours, and it's stable. I can't let you disrupt that just because you're feeling guilty or nostalgic. Then don't let me disrupt it. Let me be part of it. Before Emma could respond, Sophie appeared beside the couch, the airplane book clutched in her hands. Daddy, will you read to me? Alexander looked at Emma, who nodded slightly. Of course, sweetheart. Come here. Sophie climbed onto the couch between them, nestling against Alexander's side with the easy trust that children give to people they instinctively like. As Alexander read about airplanes and adventure, Emma watched the two of them together and saw something she hadn't dared to hope for, a father and daughter who belonged together, despite the complicated circumstances that had kept them apart. When Sophie fell asleep during the second book, Alexander carried her to one of the guest bedrooms and tucked her in, while Emma stood in the doorway, watching. She looks peaceful, Emma said softly. She looks like you when you sleep, Alexander replied, smoothing Sophie's hair. I used to watch you sleep in college, trying to memorize your face. Alex, I know this is complicated. I know I have no right to ask for a second chance. But Emma, I love you. I love Sophie. And I think, if you're honest with yourself, you still love me too. Emma leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion and emotion finally catching up with her. Even if that's true, she said quietly, love isn't enough. You have a company to run, a life that doesn't include us, and I won't be your secret family, the people you visit when it's convenient. Then don't be my secret family. Be my real family. Be my everything. What are you saying? Alexander stepped closer to her, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. I'm saying that today reminded me what's important. I'm saying that I'd rather be Sophie's father and your husband than the CEO of the most successful company in the country. I'm saying that I want to wake up every morning with you beside me and fall asleep every night reading bedtime stories to our daughter. Our daughter. She's been ours since the day she was born, Emma. I just wasn't there to know it. Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes. Alex, I can't. You don't have to decide now. Just don't leave. Stay here tonight, both of you. Let me make breakfast for Sophie in the morning. Let me start proving to you that I'm not the same man who let you walk away 5 years ago. Emma looked at Alexander, then at Sophie sleeping peacefully in the enormous bed, then back at Alexander. One night, she said finally. But Alex, I meant what I said. I won't let you hurt her. If you're not serious about this, if this is just some impulse because your wedding fell apart, tell me now, and we'll leave in the morning. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. The next morning, Alexander woke up before dawn and spent an hour learning how to make pancakes from scratch. By the time Emma and Sophie came downstairs, the kitchen smelled like vanilla and butter, and Alexander was wearing an apron that read, "World's Best Dad," a gag gift from a business associate that he'd never expected to wear unironically. "Daddy, you're cooking," Sophie announced, delighted. "I'm trying to cook," Alexander corrected. "The jury's still out on whether I'm succeeding." But the pancakes were perfect, and Sophie declared them the best she'd ever had. As they ate breakfast on the terrace overlooking the gardens, Emma found herself relaxing for the first time in years, not because of the luxury or the beautiful setting, but because of the way Alexander listened to Sophie's stories, the way he answered her endless questions with patience and genuine interest, the way he looked at both of them like they were the most precious things in his world. "I have meetings today," Alexander said as they finished eating, "but I've cleared my schedule for the rest of the week." "Alex, you can't just abandon your responsibilities." "I'm not abandoning them. I'm prioritizing them. And right now my highest priority is getting to know my daughter and convincing the woman I love to give me another chance." Over the following days, Alexander threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he'd once reserved for corporate mergers. He learned Sophie's favorite songs and sang them, badly, during bubble baths. He discovered her love for art projects and set up a dedicated craft room in the estate. He read every parenting book he could find and called his pediatrician to schedule Sophie's first appointment. But more importantly, he courted Emma with the patience and attention he should have shown 5 years earlier. He brought her coffee in the morning and asked about her teaching. He listened when she talked about her students and her dreams for the future. He showed her the man he had become beneath the corporate exterior, and slowly, carefully, he began to earn back her trust. 6 months later, Alexander stood in the rose garden where his first wedding had collapsed, watching Emma walk down the aisle in the simple white dress she had chosen herself. Sophie walked ahead of her, scattering flower petals and grinning at everyone she passed. The guest list was small this time, just Emma's family, a few close friends, and Sophie, who had insisted on being both the flower girl and the ring bearer. As Emma reached the altar, Alexander took her hands and spoke the vows he had written himself. "5 years ago, I was too young and too proud to know what real love looked like," he said. "I thought love was possession, control, shaping someone else to fit into my world. But Emma, you taught me that love is choice. It's choosing someone every day, supporting their dreams, even when they're different from yours, building a life together instead of trying to fit someone into a life you've already built." He turned to Sophie, who was standing beside them with a solemn expression that suggested she understood the importance of the moment. "And Sophie, I promise to be the father you deserve, not just the one who provides for you, but the one who shows up, who listens, who teaches you that you can be anything you want to be. I promise to love your mother the way she deserves to be loved, so you grow up knowing what real partnership looks like." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Sophie cheered loudly and threw the remaining flower petals in the air. As Alexander kissed his bride, he could hear his daughter's laughter mixed with the applause of their small but perfect audience. That evening, as they sat on the terrace eating cake and watching Sophie chase fireflies in the garden, Emma leaned against Alexander's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The life you gave up, the merger, the social connections, all of it." Alexander looked at Sophie, who was trying to catch fireflies in a mason jar, while explaining to her teddy bear why they would let them go afterward. He thought about the boardroom meetings he'd restructured, the social events he'd declined, the life of careful calculation he'd traded for this chaotic, unpredictable, absolutely perfect existence. "Never," he said, pulling Emma closer. "I traded a life of obligations for a life of love. That's not a sacrifice, it's the best deal I ever made." As if she had heard him, Sophie ran over and climbed onto his lap, sticky hands and grass-stained dress and all. "Daddy, look!" she said, holding up the mason jar where several fireflies glowed softly. "I caught magic." "You certainly did, sweetheart," Alexander said, kissing the top of her head. "You caught magic, and you're going to set it free so it can bring magic to other people too." "Just like you did," Sophie said solemnly. "Mommy says you caught magic when you found us." Alexander looked at Emma, who was smiling through tears, and at Sophie, who was already running back to release the fireflies into the night sky. As the tiny lights dispersed into the darkness, each one carrying its own small miracle, Alexander realized that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as disasters. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted was the only way to find everything you actually needed. And sometimes, just sometimes, love really was enough to build a whole new world.